Hey guys, welcome back. I've jumped on quickly today to do a hashtag by the lovely Havana from Divine Tarot, and the hashtag is my tarot personality. For this tag, she asked us to select 5 tarot decks that we could somehow link to an aspect of our personality, which was a really interesting way to consider all of my tarot decks from that very personal perspective and maybe how I particularly read them. So for some it may be more based on the visual, but for others it may be more based on the experience. I don't want this to be a super long tag, it just seemed really fun and something that I hadn't necessarily discussed before, so I'm going to jump straight in. My first deck is the Lioness Oracle Tarot, and I feel like this may not necessarily link to my personality solely based on the visual, but really the experience and the story behind the creation of this deck as well. Some of you may know by now, many of you won't, that my career is based in a therapeutic setting. And when reading with this deck, I really feel like, because it's not your everyday tarot deck, the visuals really take us away from our more cognitive expectation of what tarot maybe should or shouldn't look like. And in that moment, it slows you down. I feel like this deck coaxes us to go deeper than what's on the surface and see past the visual, learning to connect with what's coming up from the visual, what are we noticing, what are we connecting with within ourselves. I find it a really healing experience from my own personal use, and also I know that Alejandra created this as part of her own healing when she lost her father, and I think that it's almost encompassed it in this deck, at least it has for me. That vision and the need to explore our own stories and what's forming from them in that moment. So I find it a really deep and cathartic reading experience, and I think that sort of cosmic and surreal aspect mixed with things that we recognise from everyday life, it's almost like piecing together dreams. And when you're working therapeutically, sometimes that's what it can feel like, is piecing together all these stories or these thoughts, feelings, visuals, and bringing it all together to make something that we can perceive and understand, make it more coherent, help us understand so that we can heal and we can grow and we can transform. And that's something that I focus on daily. That's part of my career. That's part of my general belief system. And so this deck does it amazingly. And on a side note, I'm a Leo as well. If you didn't know, Alejandra is a Leo, and very obviously she calls herself the Lioness Oracle. There's a lot of kitties in here, you know, from small domesticated pedigrees to really fierce wildcats, and that's just something that I enjoy as a side note about this deck. My next choice is the Wild Unknown Tarot, and it's interesting because one of the things that I love about this deck, I feel that it kind of maybe connects to some of what I was saying, is that it doesn't shy away from the realities and the pains of the world as well as its beauty. And there's a really good example. I feel like there's no fluff in this deck, and that it doesn't mean that there's not good in it, and it doesn't mean that there's not light in it, but it's very, very, very balanced. The light in the shadow, the healing, getting to the actual point of it, getting into the experiences without kind of faffing around. I really don't know any other way to put it. It feels like a very honest and raw and real and to the point deck visually and how I read it, and I think that that's something that I resonate with quite deeply. when I come to tarot, I don't want to pretend that things aren't happening. I'm coming for personal exploration. If I'm reading for someone else, I want them to be able to ignite the passion of self-exploration and to be able to learn from what's coming forward. And I don't want to take away from any of the pain or the experience that they may be coming with as well. And I feel that this deck's just really good for that. I like that it's very black and white, and yet it's got these very specific colours. They were very consciously chosen. I like the consciousness that went into the lines and the directionality, and that, again, I like to be conscious. I think that this deck feels like a conscious creation. And also on a more of a visual aesthetic, it's very, very me. I come across very sort of black and white maybe sometimes, and with sharp edges, but actually there's this wonderful evocative flash of colour, and there's so much more going on. So I think that it's a good visual representation of me, maybe externally as well. Next up we have the Bonefire Tarot, and continuing on that train of thought about how I may be perceived visually and outside, I definitely have more of a darker exterior in the way that I dress. Yeah, I love colour, I value colour. I see this deck as portraying the really passionate and fiery and emotional side of me. It really feels like this deck embraces the connectivity of humans and our experience, all of the colours. I see it as each card really holding its own intrinsic story, yet all of the events can be rolled together and make a cohesive lifeline, or, you know, a larger story. It feels like all of these individual collection of what make us up, and I know that in essence that's all tarot, but I feel like this one really grasps that quite well. And it's a little complicated, it's sumptuously detailed, it's evocative. They're all things that I not maybe even some of my best qualities, but definitely things that I recognise within myself, and how when I allow myself to engage with all the details, I can then further my understanding. But this does really, it's the passionate side of me, and I love that you can see everyone's emotion who's been created in this deck. I feel like I can feel what their experience is, and that's something that I look for in people. I look to read and understand body language, facial expressions. All of that stuff is part of what I feel is intrinsic to learning more about how people are communicating, and so this deck is fantastic for that. And it's my kind of art style, even though the Wild Unknown is as well. When I used to draw, if I wasn't drawing more sketch-based stuff, I loved really colourful, almost comical looking characters. I used to draw that quite a lot. I am a super nerd, so I love comic books anyway, and that's another thing that this reminds me of, where the kind of words are meshed into the picture. It really kind of makes me nostalgic to growing up with various comic books and artistic creations that I enjoyed. Next up is the Deviant Moon Tarot, and this was a really interesting one because it had to fulfill the place of a lot of qualities in one go. And what I mean by that is, this deck is commonly spoken about, and I feel that its darker, more bizarre sense of humour, the obscure tastes, the playfulness that it sort of conveys, and the deviance is definitely something that is part of my personality. It was something that I grew up around. It's a very good representation of people in my family who are close to me. And that kind of darker, more obscure artwork is something that myself and my dad enjoy quite a bit. And then also there's this other side to this where it really encompasses my enjoyment of fantasy and the magical aspects of life. And I feel like I'm yet to find another deck that fits it for me, because whilst I love Lord of the Rings and World of Warcraft, some of the fantasy that I'm talking about again is maybe a bit more obscure or a bit darker, at least perceived to be darker. Things like The Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, Donnie Darko, you know, tales that are not only magical and hold fantasy in them, but they are psychologically challenging and there's twists and turns. And I feel like this deck encompasses that a lot, but also that it can be misunderstood. And when I say misunderstood, I believe that not one deck is for everyone, in the same sense that no one human is for everyone. But I feel that the visual of this brings out a strong response as opposed to some other decks. But that's actually something that I enjoy about it. I enjoy seeing people's responses and hearing them, and then later how they may evolve or change, because actually what they once thought they saw maybe doesn't quite work that way, or it doesn't quite feel that way anymore. So I love how it challenges and stretches us to see the tongue-in-cheek and mischievous nature of this that maybe isn't the first thing that you would come to think of. And it does that so well, at least for me. It does the psychological depths. It does the sprightly, whimsical and tongue-in-cheek aspect equally as well. And I would argue that there's actually a lot of light and dark in this deck, but I know that I know that not everyone would agree with that, but in my experience of it, and as I say, balance is something that I regard quite highly. It's one of my main focuses. So that is another one of the reasons that this deck was really connective for me. And finally, my fifth deck is the Wildwood Tarot, and this is a good representation of me, encompassing everything else that I've said. I guess not only is this an ideal world for me, or somewhat closer to an ideal world, but it really links to how I was brought up, in terms of I was brought up by fellow nature lovers. I have a desire to engage with the world that heals Mother Earth, that respects every aspect of it and not just humans. It really feels like there's a harmony depicted in this deck, and that even in the book as well as the depictions, they're discussing, you know, having a respect and a love for the earth. I grew up with a mother who was very passionate about growing her own herbs and vegetables. I was taught how to engage with animal medicine, and again, as I say, basically just respect everything that is already here before I came here, everything that keeps the world ticking over, everything that revitalises the earth and our lives as we know it. So I find that this deck brings the kind of harmony and the nature-based exploration and day-to-day living that I focus on, and that's very important to me. And it also has a lot of animal energy in it as well. And many of you will know, if you know me but at all, that animal medicine is something that's very important to me. I really, really want to live somewhere greener, somewhere that I can be in wildlife even more. And I am searching to be more, I guess, more worthy of the earth in terms of not doing harm to it. And I feel that if I were to consider how I make my magic in the earth, it would be very earthly based, it would be very rooted. And so this deck really feels like it encompasses those other aspects of myself in quite a full capacity. And I guess where the Deviant Moon couldn't show the other side of fantasy, the more green and the more sort of elf-like things that I enjoy, this has done this quite beautifully. And that is a wrap, you guys. I want to thank Havana for this very, very awesome tag. I was really drawn to this tag in particular and had been looking for another one to do for quite a while, but I wanted to do something that stretched me, that encouraged me to consider something that I haven't considered before, and to maybe bring out some decks that I use a lot but don't necessarily talk about for whatever reason. And whilst tags are often personal to some level, it felt like there was something that I could explore and give to my channel that helped people to connect with me, understand, learn a bit more about me, consider decks, things that they haven't already heard from me, so that I'm making a conscious effort as to what the people on my channel consume, I guess, for want of a better word. That's definitely been something that I've been more aware of as time's gone on. So thank you, Havana. This was awesome. I'd love to know if you guys joined in. Send me the link below in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I said, or your own responses to how you find those decks, whether you agree, disagree, and all of that jazz. And other than that, I will catch you guys soon. See you later.